Hello, good morning. Hi, I'm Elizabeth Parkinson, and I'm the Assistant Vice President for Communications here at the university. Thank you so much for joining us in our first virtual COM forum. I know it's been a while since we've been together, so thank you so much for joining us this morning and taking the next hour to hear some exciting information from the university. I'd like to start though by thanking JD, Kara, Mario, and the entire ITS team for helping us put together this COM forum. We have, it sounds like well over 300 attendees, which is very exciting. And also just a big shout out to ITS for all of their hard work and support during this pandemic. So thank you. I'd like to start by introducing Callie Michaels, our Vice President for Communications. Callie has really been our leader and guide during this unprecedented time. And we also are deeply grateful for her work. And I'd like to hand it over at this point because she's prepared some remarks. Thank you, Callie.
Well, thanks, Elizabeth, and hello to everyone. I actually maybe mistakenly thought that we were going to be able to see people's faces. So I don't know if we're going to be able to later, but it's great to virtually be together at least. Somebody reminded me that the last time we got together in person was almost exactly a year ago, and it was when we interviewed the president. So wow, that feels like forever ago, and the world's changed so dramatically. So I think we're able to make sense of this world because of all the great work that you're all doing to help people understand this place we're in right now. And so I thank you for that. And I also want to just acknowledge what a stressful time this has been for everyone. I think communicators have taken the brunt of some of this, not certainly all of it, but I know that people have put a lot of pressure on all of you as communicators to get the message out despite what we're going through. So I really want to recognize that. In particular, I know my team, a number of people have young kids, and I am forever amazed at how people are juggling managing kids at home and schooling, helping with schooling at home while juggling their jobs. And I know that's happening across the institution. So I'm really grateful for all of you. There are a number of things we've been doing that we're going to be doing this semester, continuing. Sorry, the light's hitting me a little hard to read or to see all of right now, but there are a number of things we're doing. COVID continues to be one of the big ones. And so I want to talk a little bit about that and then mention a few other things. We started the winter rollout. Geez, I'm sorry. I'm really hitting my, there's one time the whole day that this room gets this much sun and I've hit the time. We learned a lot of really difficult lessons as an institution and as communicators in the fall about how we work really in this environment. And one of the things I think we learned is that we're all feeling so isolated, and we just need to do everything we can to communicate as often as possible in as many ways as possible and as personally as we can. So one of the things we started pretty early on after some significant feedback is the weekly live briefings with the president and some other leaders. And we got that idea from Michigan Medicine. They had done it really effectively. And we took that good learning and started to do that. And those have gone really well. And we've received a lot of good feedback from that. And so we're continuing those this semester. They're now every other week because Michigan Medicine is doing the opposite week. But that's been one thing. The other thing we've done is just, again, I think because we're also overwhelmed with information and being isolated, not having our normal channels, people aren't really hearing all the messages we're delivering. So we're trying to deliver them really in every means possible. And you all have been a huge part of making that happen. So we set up the campus Maze and Blueprint website. We're sending regular email messages. We're doing these weekly briefings. We have daily updates in our record. We're using our social media, traditional media. We have digital signage on campus. We've really ramped up messages to parents and alums. That was a bit of feedback we got back that we weren't doing enough of that. So we've done that. And then more recently, we've started texting students. Students, as you know, are notoriously difficult to reach. And so we started texting them with some important messages, and that has gone really, really well. One of the first messages we delivered was asking them to sign up for a Responsa Blue. And the first text we sent out on that resulted in more than 2,800 downloads of the app that very same day. So COVID is not the only thing we're doing though. We're also trying to continue to promote the president's and the institution's priorities. And the President's Commission on Carbon Neutrality in December delivered its draft recommendations, actually put those out to the university community and for review and comments. And that's happening right now. And it's the end of February that the final recommendations will be sent to the president. So we're working on communications related to that important work. The other thing we've begun to ramp up again is our This is Michigan campaign to increase awareness of and increase positive sentiment for the work that we're doing in the state. And we have to date developed 53 stories that feature all of our schools and colleges and units, many of our units. And we had, like I said, paused some of that work during the beginning of COVID. Now we're ramping that back up. The last thing I want to mention is sexual misconduct. So this remains a top priority, the prevention education around sexual misconduct and what's expected of our community. And that happens through a lot of work that we are doing, putting out and promoting the annual data reports on just how much misconduct is occurring on campus, information about our umbrella policy and the changes to that. We are covering the major cases that have occurred here, the investigations that followed and the recommendations that came from those investigations. And then finally, what we're doing about it, the actions we're taking. And so that will all continue, as well as a review of our just communication efforts overall about the prevention education of sexual misconduct. So I'm going to just wrap up and let the program begin. But I wanted to again thank all of you during this time. You all have been helping to promote our messages about how to prevent COVID through masking, distancing, the testing program that we have, vaccination. And I know all of you are helping to promote that and really appreciate it. And you're doing that while you're juggling your day job. And again, this isn't that you're doing one bit of work instead of the other. It's that you're doing all of it. And we recognize that and are really grateful for all that help and all that great work. Thank you very much. And I really hope all of you and your families are staying well and safe. And I'm going to turn it back over to Elizabeth.
Kelly, thank you so much. What a great overview. I'm exhausted just hearing all the work that we've all accomplished during this time. So the next part of this COM forum is really the body of the program, which is talking about accessibility. Before I announce our panel, I just really want to kind of set the stage. The pandemic has really meant that we are relying on on remote learning and meetings. We all, up until, 9 months ago, I don't know that any of us spent the majority of our time on Zoom. So there's a lot of different technology and practices that have been stood up that really also impact and affect accessibility. We know that it's more important than ever to ensure that the university is a leader in this area and demonstrates the best practices. We also know that there's a high demand, in addition to digital accessibility, print accessibility as well, and that people continue to receive their information in other ways. The presentation today is meant to be a high level, and then we will follow up throughout the next weeks and months with additional more details in regards to further in the weed presentations, lunch and learns. This is not meant to be the definitive end of talking about accessibility, but really meant to be a good point in time to ensure that the campus community is aware of the resources available, and then we continue to educate and inform ourselves going forward. So our panelists today, I'll start with Phil Deaton. And Phil is a digital information accessibility coordinator through the Office of Institutional Equity. Phil plays a role in providing strategic direction and compliance support, really for all IT accessibility issues at U of M. He works on digital applications, websites, content, meetings, events, and more. And he's really been an absolutely phenomenal partner to us, as well as I'm sure to many of you. Brandon Werner, our second panelist, is a screen reader specialist, and he's through ITS, Information and Technology Services. Brandon works really with faculty, staff, and students on ensuring that we have assistive technologies that are related to blindness. And he also tests software services to make sure that they meet the relevant guidelines. Our third panelist is part of my team, Martin Suave. Martin is brand identity manager through Michigan Creative through the Office of Communications. And in addition to really being our brand czar and overseeing the brand identity as art director for Michigan Creative, he also leads the team that's responsible for developing print accessibility and best practices for the university communications. And then our moderator, who will be managing the Q&A, which we've allotted time for after the panel, is Diane Tachman. And Diane is an account manager through Michigan Creative and also plays a role of really being the ComForum wrangler. She's the one that is behind the scenes and pulling all of this great content and communication together. So without further ado, I will hand it over to our panel, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for that introduction, Elizabeth. If you can go ahead and advance the slides, I think forward 2. One more. Yep. Yeah, so thanks again for that introduction. My name is Phil Deaton. I work in the Office for Institutional Equity. My pronouns are he, him, and his. And thank you so much for making some space for us today at this February Communicators Forum.
My name is Brandon Werner. I'm the screen reader specialist in ITS. Thanks again for the introduction. And as Phil said, thanks for making space for us to present today.
So we are going to, as Elizabeth also mentioned, very quickly go through a couple of different topics today. We're going to first give an overview of what accessibility is, including some of the types of challenges, accessibility challenges people face. Then we're going to dive into talking about accessible websites and content. The next topic will be accessible meetings and events. And then our third main topic is accessible print materials. We're going to do a brief pause after each one, just so that you may use the Q&A feature throughout the conversation to ask questions about any of these topics. So if something comes to your mind, go ahead and use that Q&A feature. Or if you don't feel comfortable sharing your question over the Q&A, you can also feel free to email us at accessibility@umich.edu. Just another moment of housekeeping, a note, this meeting is being recorded and the presentation, I believe, will be uploaded to the brand site. There are a lot of links throughout this presentation with more information if you're interested in these topics and in diving deeper, and we hope that you can follow up through those. If you can advance the slide. So first, I want to talk about what accessibility is. And to talk about accessibility, we have to talk about disability. So 1 in 4 people in the United States identifies as having a disability according to the 2014 Census Bureau data. And really what accessibility is about ensuring that disabled people can enter and participate in spaces. And in the digital context, this may look a little bit different. If you can advance the next slide, please. So this is a quick comic panel that I like to show. I was not the original creator of this panel, and I've referenced some in the reference section in the slides if you'd like to check out some of their work. But the panel shows an entry to a building that is snowed over. It's a raised entry and there's a ramp and some stairs to get to the door. There's a group of kids waiting to get in, including a kid who is a wheelchair user, and there's a person shoveling the stairs. So I'll just read off the dialogue here. The kid who is a wheelchair user asks, "Could you please shovel the ramp?" The individual shoveling the stairs says, "All these other kids are waiting to use the stairs. When I get through shoveling them off, then I will clear the ramp for you." And the kid who is a wheelchair user responds, "But if you shovel the ramp, we can all get in." This is obviously a physical example of accessibility, but this general principle applies to digital accessibility as well. We want to create spaces and maintain spaces in such a way that everyone can enter these spaces. So digital accessibility includes things like captioning and American Sign Language. I'd just like to drop a thank you to our captioner, Tracy, today. Um, but digital accessibility can also include things like accessible websites and other elements to think about as well. There are many benefits to accessibility beyond making inclusive spaces for folks with disabilities, but I hope that you'll use that as your leading reason to want to do some of this work. Accessibility also can improve your search engine optimization, and in talking with other folks on campus, having those moments to talk about the user experiences for folks with disabilities helps to make sure that we're being thoughtful about UX in general. And one other note is that digital accessibility impacts not just screen reader users. Some of you on the call may be familiar with screen reader users, but also other individuals with disabilities. But I think first let's take a look at what a screen reader is like. So I'll turn it over to Brandon, and if you could advance to the next slide.
Thanks so much, Phil. So there are two types of screen readers. The first type is used by folks who are totally blind or nearly totally blind. And the way this type of screen reader works is that you generally use only the keyboard to control the computer, because for someone who is blind or nearly totally blind, they can't see the pointer, so a mouse isn't a good input method. Also, this type of screen reader usually has output via speech or Braille. So Braille display is it's a device that has pins that goes up and down, and you can feel the Braille. The other type of screen reader is used by folks who are low vision or who may have other needs to have text read aloud. And in this type of screen reader, you actually highlight text with the mouse and then click a button and that text is read back. So this is usually for folks who can use their eyes to read the computer sometimes, but then on other times it's helpful for them to have text read back. So now that we have kind of that distinction, a little bit of introduction to screen readers, on the next slide here, we have a video that we've prepared just to kind of give a little bit of an overview of screen readers and how they work well and how they might not work well as well. Can you start the
Hi
video?
there, my name is Phil and I'm from the accessibility team. I'm joined here today by Brandon, who's also from the accessibility team. We're going to do a short demo on screen readers. Screen readers are a technology that can be used by people with disabilities to read information off on a screen. It's important that people who develop websites, applications, etc., create them in an accessible way so that screen reader users can use them. And Brandon is going to demo what that looks like now. Brandon?
Thanks so much, Phil. So we're going to use the Accessible University website. It's a fictional website that's designed to teach folks about accessibility. There are two versions, an accessible version and an inaccessible version. I'll do the screen reader demo with the accessible version so you can see how things are supposed to work. And then we'll move over to the inaccessible version so you can get a sense of how things can go wrong if things aren't coded properly. We'll use quick commands a lot in this demo. Basically, the way those work is that you use a key like H to move by heading, B to move by button, or E to move by edit box. And then you can combine shift with those keys to move backwards. So we'll start now. I'll move by heading on this page. Headings are, if they're coded properly, allow you to kind of move by logical blocks.
Main landmark featured story slideshow heading level 2. Welcome. Heading level 2.
Bienvenido.
Heading level 2.
It's worth noticing how the language also is read properly here.
Accesible Universidad UA.
Another thing I'd like to point out is that I
Back.
can move by button to get to the buttons in the carousel. B moves by button.
Main menu navigation. Main landmark previous slide graph. Next slide graph. List with 3 items. Slide 1.
Also, I can use E to move to edit boxes on the page. I'll do that now.
Form name. Required. Edit required invalid entry.
You heard it give us a lot of good information there. The fact that it was a form and the fact that it was required and that it was invalid entry. That information is often visually denoted by a star, and sometimes the color of the form change if there's incorrect input. However, a screen reader user doesn't get that info, so to have it provided here is really helpful. I'll play it one more time just so you can hear what
Name.
all that information sounds like.
Name. Required. Edit required invalid entry.
Also, if I use X to move to the checkboxes,
Desired major. S grouping list with 6 items. Computer science checkbox not checked.
we heard it say desired major grouping, and then it said that there was a group of checkboxes, and it said that there were 6 items. So basically, we have a lot of information provided here. We know that all the majors, the checkboxes are majors, they go in this group. It's very well laid out. Now let me go and quickly show the inaccessible version so you can see how things can go wrong.
Accessible. Unlabeled.
I can't move by heading on this page.
No next heading. No previous heading.
Also, the buttons for the carousel aren't properly labeled. They're just clickables and they're not buttons either.
Link, out of list link. O student, clickable, list with 3 items. Clickable.
Another thing I'd like to show is the language isn't read right on this page because it's not marked up properly as Spanish.
Bienvenido. Accesible
As you
Universidad.
can hear, it's reading with an English voice and it sounds pretty terrible. It's using English voice to do Spanish pronunciations. Also on this page, the form isn't labeled at all. So if I hit E,
Edit.
all it says is edit. The text is visually located near the control, however, it's not programmatically associated with it. And the screen readers can only kind of do what you tell them. So this text needs to be programmatically associated with the control. Also, it didn't tell us it was required or that there was currently invalid entry. Also, if I hit X to move to the checkbox that we looked at before,
Checkbox not checked.
it didn't tell us that the name of the group of the checkboxes, that it wasn't a group, or how many there were in this group because of the improper markup. And so you can see that when things are coded right, a screen reader actually works pretty well and lets you get around a web page. One other thing I'd like to point out is that earlier I talked about the things like headings. It may visually look like there are headings on this page. However, the reason that the screen reader can't find them is because they're just bigger font and bolded. They're not actually using proper HTML heading markup. Thank you for showing that video. Before I move on, I just want to really quickly say that a couple times in the video, I talked about things working and not working. That's all controlled by HTML. We don't have time to get to that in the presentation today. But if you have questions about those specific HTML bits and stuff, you can write to us, and we've got information about that later. We're now going to sort of wind down in talking about an introduction to accessibility, and we're going to start talking more about accessible website and content in websites. So how can you make your websites accessible? How to make documents that you prepare and things like that accessible. And I'll hand it off to Phil to talk about how you can make websites that you design accessible.
Thanks, Brandon. If you can go ahead and advance one more slide, please. Thank you. So one of the first things that we like to talk about with web accessibility is we understand that websites get made in different ways on campus. Sometimes we design sites ourselves internally, and sometimes we leverage vendor partners. So if you're designing a site yourself, it's really important to consider accessibility in the different phases of that site development. I know sometimes those phases can include things like research, design, development, and content strategy. Other times those only include the development phase. Um, but there's a lot of great tips out there for how to design websites with accessibility in mind. We have a link here to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1. That sounds like a mouthful, and it's a little bit different to read this standard, but we hope that with this understanding of how screen readers work, and as we're thinking about some of how accessibility impacts our constituents, that you'll be able to think about how the standard leads to more positive user experience. And that standard has some great documentation about getting started with accessibility. And again, we really encourage you to reach out to the accessibility team for help. Back to you, Brandon.
Thanks so much, Phil. So did you advance to the next slide? We're going to talk a little bit about how to implement accessibility when you're working with partners outside the university. So one of the things to keep in mind is that unfortunately, sometimes accessibility is not considered a part of the core product, and you may actually end up having to pay extra to your vendors to get accessibility included, which is kind of unfortunate, but that's still the way it is. So make sure that when you set up an offer like building a website or buying a product, that accessibility is included as part of that. One of the ways you can do that is to make sure that accessibility language is included in the RFP. One of the things that can be most helpful, if sometimes there is only one option and there might be some accessibility issues. So if you put information in there that they deal with the vendor that they have to resolve the accessibility issues by a certain date in a timetable, that can be really helpful. So that way they're sort of held accountable and they sort of complete the required accessibility remediations by a certain date. Could you advance the slide? So this next slide, I'm gonna have to cover very quickly just for time constraints. There's a lot here, but I do want to point out some of the major things. This slide particularly pertains to how to make content within Word documents and websites that you design and things like this accessible. So the first thing that I want to call out is media and captions. So whenever you have video, it's really important to have captions. This ensures that everybody has access to the speech content of what you're presenting. The other really important thing from this slide is structure. So as I mentioned in the video that we made, headings are extremely important. Making sure that you actually, for example, if you're building content in Word, go to the styles pane and click on a heading, as opposed to just making the text bigger and changing the font and bolding the font, etc. That way screen reader users can move through the document. Also, it lets you create a table of contents for free. That's a big advantage. Section markers are really important. So if you have a 2-column, like a newspaper article style where there's 2 columns, laying those out as sections, or otherwise, if they're next to each other, the screen reader will read a line from one of those and then it'll jump across and it'll read the other line, which is, it's really uncomfortable as a screen reader user to hear, as you can imagine, a line from one article and then a line from the next article. It's kind of discontinuous and it doesn't really work that well. Finally, page breaks are really important because otherwise, if you hit the line return a bunch of times, when screen reader users are oftentimes, as I talked about during the video, using the arrow keys to navigate in a Word document, you'll hit the arrow keys and it'll say blank, 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 blank. Whereas if you have the page break, which is the Control Enter in Word, it'll just say page return. It'll be one press of the arrow key. Also, if you use the page return, the new page, you don't have to keep messing with the number of blank lines after, because it'll automatically correct itself. So next I'm going to pass it off to Phil. He's going to talk a little bit about some of the automated accessibility scanning tools that we have on campus.
Thanks, Brandon. So again, we didn't have time to go through all those quick tips today, but we have a tool that can help you get started with accessibility. Um, ITS has access to an automated web accessibility scanner called Axe Monitor. And Axe Monitor is a very useful product for getting a quick overview of accessibility. Right now, we have it scanning the 200 most used sites at the university. If that might be one of the sites that you manage, you can take a look at the list of current scans to see if there is a scan in your purview. And if there is, you can actually email the email address on this email or on this slide to request access to that scan information. We're really trying to push that information into your hands so that you have the autonomy to make decisions about accessibility. And if you want to learn more about this, you can visit this Learn More link in the slides here. If you can advance to the next slide. These are just some quick links. The first one goes to the accessibility quick tips, which really expands on the tips that Brandon talked about, and it talks about them in more detail. The accessible digital documents link here talks about applying these tips to digital documents, and it is a very good starting point. The color accessibility with the brand link goes to the brand team site where you can see web accessible color combinations using U of M branding. And it's a very good way to get started on that. And this accessible email link is a newer resource that we have been working on for sending communications through email, whether that's through email campaigns and marketing campaigns or just one-off emails. We've really been learning a lot about this from some of you that have been leaders in this space. And this is a new resource, so we'd love your feedback and we'd love to learn more from you. And I think next I'll turn it over to Brandon.
So this is kind of one of those section breaks we talked about. Thanks again, Phil, by the way. Here we're going to kind of stop talking about content accessibility and we're going to transfer over to talking about accessibility in meetings and events. So basically we'll just give you some tips on how you can make your meetings accessible and events accessible that you host. Can you advance the slide? So we generally for accessibility recommend Zoom as the most accessible platform. It's accessible for screen reader users, keyboard users. You can adjust the font for captions and chat, and you can also move around the speaker and caption tiles. These are all very, very important for accessibility. So I also want to take the opportunity here to define CART and automated captioning. CART is when you have actually someone in the meeting typing in captions and providing the captions in real time, a human person providing that typing. Automated captioning is when the computer does the captioning. And we do recommend CART when possible. Obviously, it's a little more accurate, but we do find that automated captions also is very useful. So keep that in mind for your meetings, but we do recommend, if possible, always turning on the automated captioning for the meetings that you host. I think the most important resource on this slide, we have a few, but the accessible video conferencing webpage talks a lot about just kind of giving an intro to all these different technologies. We have linked from there a link to a matrix, which is really useful. It talks about all these tools and it sort of just describes which accessibility features work and which don't in each tool if you go to that matrix. So that can be useful to know if you're planning to use a tool, which accessibility features are provided by which tool. Could you please advance the slide? Okay, so we're going to be talking in this slide just a little bit about accessible materials in meetings. One of the things to be aware of is that a screen sharing can sometimes be inaccessible. The reason why is because oftentimes to accommodate different disabilities, folks will do things like invert colors or they might change the font on presentations. For the case of a screen reader, the screen reader actually talks to the program. So the screen reader actually talk to PowerPoint to figure out what's on the slides. And of course, if it's a screen share, it's just a picture coming over Zoom, so that can't happen. Uh, to kind of help with this, we recommend sharing materials in advance. That can be really helpful for folks if you give them in advance. That way they can sort of do what helps them from an accessibility standpoint to make the materials that you provide accessible. I'm going to pass it along to Phil, who's going to talk a little bit more about accessible types of materials and meeting registration and how to make these things accessible.
Thanks, Brandon. So where possible, we actually recommend providing materials in their original format. So, that would be like the Word document and the PowerPoint, as opposed to necessarily the PDF that you might create from that. That said, if you do need to share a PDF, maybe you made a designed document and that's really the best way to share that. There are additional accessibility steps that you can take to increase the accessibility of those PDFs. We've left a link here to Adobe's site for some documentation on that. And again, Adobe Acrobat DC is the technology that you would actually use to make those accessibility changes, and that should be available to most of the folks on this call just through our the Adobe and relationship that we have now. Another aspect of events that is important is in event registration forms, letting people know the format of the meetings and what participation looks like in those meetings. This is really helpful so that folks with disabilities may know if they need to ask for additional accommodations. And we really recommend just explicitly asking that in your event registration forms. Are there any additional accommodations you may need to participate in this event? Something as simple as that a communicator or an event host may include in a meeting invitation could make it so that someone can finally participate in an event series that we're putting on when they may have not been able to in the past. So that's a very essential part of hosting events. And you can also let folks know if you are going to proactively be providing any accessibility already. So that could be through CART, or it could be through ASL, or you might just be mentioning that we're using the automated live captioning for this meeting. So if you can advance to the next slide. A quick note on automated captioning. Automated captioning is really great, and one of the things when the pandemic first started to really affect the University of Michigan, I was receiving a lot of questions about how are we going to make meetings and events accessible. So I was really happy when the folks in ITS came up with this solution for automated captioning. One thing to note, the quality varies depending on different factors like microphone quality, if you have any background noise. I know a lot of us have barking dogs, howling cats in my case, and other background events that we're working with every day. So that can affect the quality. And another thing to note is that automated captioning does not always replace CART. If someone specifically requests for an accommodation for a live captionist for an event, we still recommend that you have the live captionist. I will say though that this tool has been so useful for many individuals who are deaf or hard of hearing or who have cognitive disabilities. And we've been hearing a lot of positive feedback on this. So just another thank you to ITS, and I hope we all can continue to thank ITS and our IT units for their incredible work at this time as well. So if you can advance to the next slide. One of the main questions we get asked is who is responsible for event accessibility? And the short answer is anyone who hosts an event right now. There isn't really a central service or fund for logistical processes and costs. So it's important that we all learn a little bit about this. Now, That said, if you have questions about the topic, if you shoot us an email, we are very happy to try to assist. It can just be a little bit difficult for us to jump into the context of, your event and your unit and know how to help. But we can certainly help if you're needing assistance with budget justification and things like that. Costs associated with events typically come up when we're providing CART or ASL. But there are other accommodations that we may need to include for events. So in digital events, that might be a copy of a recording or accessible materials in advance or captioned videos in a presentation. In physical events, you may have things like fragrance-free zones and designated areas where folks who are interacting with an ASL interpreter can view that ASL interpreter. And I believe that, as Callie mentioned earlier, for the weekly briefings from President Schlissel and Provost Collins, you see in those emails request if you need any kind of accommodation and a statement about which accessibility services will be provided at each. So I think that that is a great example of how to provide accessible events and an important part of making sure that our community is informed. So if you can advance to the next slide, I am actually going to, at this point, pause on the subject of accessible meetings and events. I'm sorry we're going so quickly today, but I would like to turn it over to Martin Suave to talk about print accessibility and some of the work he has done there. Martin?
Thanks, Phil. I'm Martin Suave, the brand identity manager. I work at Michigan Creative as an art director, and I had the team for the print accessibility team. I'll start today by saying, most people think of websites or digital media when they talk about accessibility, but we really can't forget about print. And while print is probably one of the least accessible forms of communication, since we can't include assistive technology like Phil and Brandon have talked about, there are things that we can do to help ensure we engage the widest audience possible. And to do that, we need to consider accessibility before and during the design process. Of course, the best way to ensure accessibility is to offer alternate modalities like electronic files, audio, braille, large print, etc. But making sure your audience knows how to access those. Can we go to the next slide? As far as your print pieces themselves, the new accessibility page on the brand site provides some best practice guidelines to help. I'll go through some of those on here today, but I encourage everyone to visit the site at brand.umich.edu for more detailed information. Next slide. The first of 4 major considerations is fonts. These days, we have access to countless fonts in myriad styles and weights, which makes it impossible to pick one minimum size to ensure readability for every font possible. So things to consider when choosing fonts are mainly legibility. So sans serif fonts are generally more readable than serif fonts. If you do choose to use a serif font, avoid any with dramatic thicks and thins or exaggerated serifs. Any kind of exaggeration in a letter form makes things harder to read. Fonts with large X heights are easier to read. And basically the larger the font, the better. There's more info on the brand site regarding sizes and percentages, but also know that extra lettering helps readers maintain their pace and move smoothly through content. And finally, Roman characters are best. Try to avoid italics and all caps whenever possible. And also avoid hyphenation. Breaking up words makes reading more difficult for everyone. Simplicity is always a good idea. Avoid too many different fonts. Using several weights of a single font is better than using 3 different fonts on a page. Try to always set your type flush left, rag right, because using justified text creates weird spacing and can decrease readability. And short line lengths are optimal. And contrast, just like online, is always a consideration. But there are really no good tools for determining that for print. So online color contrast tools are still the best way to help with that. Also, you shouldn't rely on color as the only means of differentiating information. So, changing the, like Phil was talking about in the forms, using color to indicate that there's a difference in information isn't good enough. It doesn't include everyone. So you should also use symbols or patterns or additional text identifiers. Can we go to the next slide? Okay, I lost my place here. So the next concern is design, and obviously readability is key, and simplicity may be the best way to achieve that. So paper choice is important because bright white can produce excessive glare. So much so that in some cases, light type reversed out of a dark background is more readable. So when choosing paper, choose a dull finish, a smooth paper, heavy enough to prevent show through if your piece is two-sided. Limit overly decorative fonts or type on a path. Make sure any words treated decoratively are repeated within the main copy, so you're not relying on people being able to decipher your decoration. Try to avoid placing text over photos or illustrations or any graphic unless you're absolutely certain that you can guarantee enough contrast to ensure readability. Can we go? Yes. And as far as simplicity goes, if you're creating a folded piece, try to make them as simple and intuitive as possible. The fewer folds, the better. Keep the organization of content straightforward. You can do that by using headings to break up copy and enhance readability, and really make sure that your headings are descriptive of the text that follows them. Ensure paragraphs have consistent letter spacing and word spacing. Inconsistent spacing can decrease readability. And avoid visual clutter and maximize white space. I know designers are going to love this, but people with low vision and those with cognitive disabilities benefit from ample white space. Next slide. The third consideration is language. Simplicity is as crucial here as in design. You really need to familiarize yourself with your audience. Know your audience, write for them and not the experts. Keep it short and simple, short sentences, short paragraphs, short sections, and really clarify complicated material. Avoid complex words, confusing jargon, and acronyms. And if you do use acronyms, make sure to spell them out at least once in the content. Usually we do that the first time we use the acronym. Break up copy using headings to help readers navigate. Headings, like I said before, should be descriptive of the text that follows, and use the active voice instead of passive. Next slide. And finally, there's planning. U of M values diversity in all forms, and that means welcoming accessibility. And that means planning to provide alternatives and processes that members of the community can follow to request those materials. It's possible that you'll need to plan for extended schedules because you'll need to leave time for creation of alternate formats, including proofing of those and review by accessibility experts if you can. And all of this could increase your budget because you need to plan for adequate paper size and the quality of stock, so there's no show through, high resolution images, alternate formats, and just the extra hours and funding needed for creating these additional formats. Next slide. And finally, I'm going to ask you if you'd like to join the team. Phil Deaton and Jenna Smallage were really integral in developing these recommendations, and we'd love to build a larger team of print accessibility experts across the university. So if you're interested in helping with that, please email us at brandteam@umich.edu. And I will give it back to Phil.
Thanks, Martin, and thanks for all of your incredible leadership on this. It's been awesome to work on this project. It's a little bit out of my digital bailiwick, but I've learned a lot from you. If you can advance to the next slide. I think a lot of folks have the question, how can we help and how can we get involved? And I'd like to turn it over to Brandon to talk about that a little bit.
Thanks so much, Phil. So as Phil kind of said, we're going to stop talking about print accessibility here and pause on that. And again, we apologize for all this material, and we're going to sort of move into ways you can help. So one of the things to think about is that accessibility is a shared responsibility. One person can't do all the work. If you split the accessibility tasks up among your team, it can really be helpful and prevent burnout. If you learn about accessibility, reaching out to us, talking to your teammates, there's lots of different ways to learn. We came up with this sort of thing to kind of help you remember, prioritize, advocate, and include accessibility. We sort of hope that we kind of think that really encompasses ways that you can incorporate accessibility, and we hope that helps you sort of remember accessibility when you're working on projects. On campus, we have a group called the WOG. This is a group that focuses on web accessibility across campus. People come from many different parts of campus, and we put together content, and it's very much dependent on what the group wants. So the group tells us what they're interested in, and we put information together on that, and we have conversations about accessibility. And we also often have folks from the group talk about what they've been doing related to accessibility at the university. We have information about that in the resources. It's the first Tuesday of every month, and we also have an email list for that. So if you're interested, check that out in the resources, and we'd love to have you become a part of that group. I'm going to pass it off to Phil now. He's going to talk a little bit about some of the references. We covered a lot of material, and this next slide gives a little bit of information about the references to some of that material.
Thanks, Brandon. So a lot of folks ask about that comic panel, and I just included a link to the author and the illustrator. And there's a couple links here to the web content accessibility guidelines, to some internal resources. We included a link to the screen reader intro that we gave today, as well as kind of a more full demo of screen readers in two parts in this section here, since a lot of folks, that's one of the questions we get a lot is, can you show us how a screen reader works? So hopefully this helps. And you should have access to materials after this talk. And again, this meeting is being recorded. So we hope that you can look back at this, you can reach out to us, and that you might be able to share this with folks on your teams if you think it's helpful for them. If you can advance to the next slide. This is the concluding slide, a little bit late today as things happen. So for general accessibility inquiries, please reach out to accessibility@umich.edu. For print accessibility inquiries, please reach out to brandteam@umich.edu. We haven't stuck with our timetable perfectly here, but I believe we should have a couple of minutes for questions. And again, if you're not comfortable using the QA for whatever reason, just please email us and we'd love to talk and assist you in your work. Thank you all for prioritizing accessibility in everything that you do. Working with many of you has been very rewarding, and I've learned a lot from working with the communicators on this campus about accessibility. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil, and thank you to all of our presenters. There was a lot of great info here today. As Phil said, we are a little crunched for time, so if we don't get a chance to answer your question here, we will follow up with you directly afterwards. So without further ado, let's get started. Our first question here, I'm going to direct towards you, Phil, says, we've been advised that automated captions need to be revised before we can post an event recording online. Is this a U of M standard?
Hi, Diane. So that's a good question. We really encourage people to revise those captions, especially as accuracy might be low. I think one of my colleagues I've worked with some on campus, Jack Bernard, did an example of this one time when we were discussing this topic with someone, and he canceled out 1 out of every 10 words. So that's assuming you have like 90% accuracy. And he made it so that the way that the message that he was sending, wasn't coming through at all. You can see how kind of any percentage drop in accuracy could have an impact on comprehension. If you feel like the caption track is most of the way there, you can do a lot of that editing using tools like My Video or YouTube's caption editor, and then you can download those captions. And I use an open source application myself to change caption format types if you ever need to do that. Some common ones are SRT and VTT, and there's a couple of tools out there that can help with that. So I'd be happy to follow up.
This is Brandon. One thing I'd quickly like to add too is that the accuracy of caption really depends on the materials too. So as you can imagine, advanced sciences, like, things like chemistry, medicine, computer programming, for things like that, where the terms and jargon gets more complicated, I think that the automated captioning can fall short. So, it's just kind of, it's worth taking a thought and, about the subject, you're presenting on too, and think about, if it has complicated jargon and you might need to, I guess, schedule or plan more time to go back and correct things.
Thanks, Brandon. Our next question, how detailed should alt text be? Whenever I try to add more description, I get a warning that the alt text is too long. Is it fine to just say headshot of Mark or group of students laughing?
I'll take this one. This is Brandon. There's more detailed information on our accessibility site about this, but I'll take it really quick right now. It's really context specific. And I'll use the U of M logo as an example for this, as I've done in some of my write-ups. On the homepage of the UM website, if you had a link that had a picture of the UM logo going to the homepage, in alt text of just UM logo homepage would be enough. However, if you had a page that was giving a kind of a history of the university, and part of that history provided history of where the UM logo came from, you would want to describe it in more detail. Another quick example, if you had a logo involving like a globe, you could just say like a globe, a picture of a globe. However, if you were using that picture, for example, in like a science or a history class to show like population density, or if you were using it in a science class to show like maybe, I don't know, like where there's different sorts of like different types of precipitation or anything like that based on the different parts of the world, you want to describe it in more detail. So really thinking about context is really important. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, there's also a good web resource that we can link for that if you want to direct that question to our email too.
Great, thank you. So unfortunately, we're about out of time here, and I have several questions here. So again, I'll make sure that we reach out to you directly to get these answered, and these will be made available online after the fact. This last question is a good segue into what I wanted to mention next. Is there an accessibility group on U of M Workplace? And I just want to mention that we will post on Workplace when these are made available with a link to where you can find the presentation and the recording. So Phil, I'll let you answer this. I don't think there's a group yet, but I think that's a great suggestion.
Hi there. I think there may be a group. I am not as big of a workspace user. I don't actually remember what it's called right now. But I think that someone did make a group out of LSNA to discuss this topic. And again, there's that web accessibility working group if you're looking for some community. We meet weekly with that, or not weekly, we meet monthly with that group. And if there's a topic you're interested in having us discuss or that you would like to discuss in the group, we could get you on the agenda for that too.
Thank you so much. And now I will turn this back over to Elizabeth for our wrap up.
Great. Thank you, Diane. Thank you, Phil, Martin, Brandon. Lots of great information. And I want to reiterate that the full presentation with links, as well as the recording of this ComForum, along with all the Q&A. So, we'll answer all the questions, and then we'll go ahead and post all those answers so that everyone can see the questions that were asked as well as the answers. And those will all be linked from Workplace as well as posted on the ComForum. And we'll send out an email as well through the ComForum email list. So there's lots of different ways you'll be alerted as to when the presentation recording and those Q&As are live. Thank you for joining us today. And please mark your calendar. April 22nd will be our annual talk with President Schlissel. And Callie will be hosting us, and it's our informal conversation with the president around all things university and communications. So thank you again for joining us today, and enjoy the rest of the day and week.